Hi, and welcome to MoCDA Talk Series. We're connecting with Doreen Rios, curator specialized in digital art and culture and founder of Antimateria. Antimateria emerges from the need of consolidating an informative platform as well as an exhibition space that enfolds the artistic creation based on new media, performed by Latin American artists, curators, and art promoters. Doreen's work focuses on research and curation of digital art and post-media digital practices. Enjoy the talk. Hey, hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
I'm good. I'm good. Staying home since yesterday.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay, that's good. Where have you been
Yeah.
before? Have you guys just gone on lockdown yesterday or?
Well, not full on lockdown, but yesterday we got asked for the all the Secretary of Culture in Mexico was asked to undertake the proper measures of
Mm-hmm.
safety. So it's not necessarily like a lockdown in itself, but we are asked to work from home, which
Uh-huh.
makes a lot of sense for us since I work for the uh, Center for Digital Culture. So for us, it's like,
You guys are
natural.
used to
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Let's just do this. Yes,
Just a
yes.
normal day at
What
work.
about you? How are you?
Sure, yeah. I've been staying inside for about 3 weeks now, so it's been a little longer here. But so far, it's been okay, so can't complain. Just the food shortage, but apart from that, is going all right. Thank you for joining me today. It's wonderful to talk to you. And so today I would like for us to explore what the role of a curator is. Yesterday I was on a call with Kevin Abosch, and we actually touched on the fact that there may be more curators bringing that knowledge into the space, especially online, and how this will influence in a way the perception that we have of digital art, because I feel that now more than ever we see more art and we started to appreciate it in a way that it wasn't maybe so clear before, that what we were looking at was digital art in a way. We just thought maybe it was digital stuff, and now we're actually recognizing it for the value it has in its own. So I just wanted to, start the conversation with you. If you could give a little background about how you became a curator and what does it mean to curate online?
Yeah, sure. Well, it is also a very interesting time, I think, to have this conversation, especially because of what has been going on for the past at least couple of weeks. And like you said, now it feels like there's a rush for going online, especially for museums that haven't necessarily been able to
Yeah,
create a proper platform for their spaces. And now they are kind of like wondering how can they start, even if late, but better
how
now
can they
than
do
never,
it?
right?
Yeah.
So, well, as for myself, I did a bachelor in architecture. And while I was doing my bachelor, I realized that, of course, digital tools are a key part of architecture education, at least in the school that I did my bachelor at. And so I started wondering, what happens with all of these digital designs and all these 3D models, renderings, images, and so forth that you produce in order to be able to communicate
Mm-hmm.
a project that will eventually get built, let's say, in reality,
Mm-hmm.
and what's like the role of these digital part of the design process for an architectural project. And I was wondering if it could be something else than just communicating a project. And so I think that it started pretty much there, and I got also very interested at some point during the bachelor in video mapping, and especially video mapping within architectural, like really big architectural sites. I thought it was very interesting to think about architecture as something that feels like it cannot be removed from time unless you do something that is very drastic. And sometimes that doesn't allow for this space to evolve or for this space to be understood in other ways, in other, let's say, more contemporary ways. So when I started let's say, acknowledging video mapping as a practice that could potentially engage both of these languages. On one hand, yes, the architectural bit, like, you know, the very traditional and conventional form of seeing and consuming and experiencing architecture, but then on the other side, all of this digital part that comes into play when you're doing a video mapping, and how can you transform. What I thought was fascinating is how could you transform a space without touching it? You know, like only with light you could turn something into something else for, you know, a short period of time generally, but it can become something else. And I think that conversation is what started, well, getting me like more in depth into thinking about all of these digital processes, first within architecture, but then afterwards within other sort of practices. At some point, of course, I started wondering, like, oh, are there people out there using this software for something else that's not, you know, architecture? Of course there were, and when I started finding them, I fell in love with it. I don't know. I was just like, well, this is amazing. You know, what happens within these spaces and inside the screen, sometimes it feels, I don't know, much more compelling than something that's gonna take, I don't know, like a year or two at least to take its final shape. And I don't know, I think it pretty much started from there. And even though I was not full on, let's say, working within digital art by then, I was already researching a tiny bit, you know, in my free time, and kind of like thinking about who is doing this in Mexico, where can I go see this, where can I meet these people, what kind of stuff they're working on, you know, like what are they thinking when using these devices and this software. So eventually I was like, well, you know, I started thinking about my own practice as a recent graduate from architecture school, because I was very much aware that I didn't really want to be within the traditional framework of working within architecture, you know, like working for an architecture firm, or I don't know, like doing rendering or design, or I just couldn't really see myself inside that. However, I've always been very fond of architecture, and I think it's something that will stay with me forever. That's the way I understand. I don't know. That's the way I understand life in general, I would say. So at some point, I realized, because by this point, everything that I've researched and everything that I've seen regarding digital arts hadn't really been within a, let's say, academic framework. It was more like, you know, going around the internet basically, and you know, finding some books and then sharing some PDFs with someone and going to exhibitions and just pretty much being there. So at some point someone started telling me like, oh, you know, like architects I think could be great curators. And I was like, what is that? What's a curator? And when I understood the role of the curator, I think at first I understood the notion of what a curator does as if the curator was a translator between artwork and audiences. So for me, that was very, very interesting, especially because you actually get to design a space. You do have, well, at least from my point of view, a way of approaching this from architecture. So of course, there's an academic side to it. Of course, there's a research side to it. Of course, there's, you know, like a very sensible also way of approaching what's going on within the art world. But then also you have to put that in a space. And by designing the space, I thought I could put into play what I had learned from architecture school. So yeah, that's how it started. And then eventually I started wondering, what do I do to become a curator? You know, like, I don't know anyone in the art world, and I have not studied in an art school before, so what should I do? I realized that in Mexico there were very few places where I could, let's say, study, like properly study something regarding curatorial studies. So I started looking for other possibilities outside of Mexico, and yeah, eventually I started doing this master's in contemporary curation at Winchester School of Art, and yeah, that's how it all started.
Sounds
Yeah.
like a very fascinating journey that took you from architecture to something that, you know, acknowledges the dynamic of the space, whether it's physical or digital, into the translation of the work. Because as you were saying, a curator is somebody that translates the work and perhaps helps communicating the meaning of what we see, what we experience, into something that is more readable in a way for the broader audience, and putting somehow in communication what the artist is trying to say to what society is looking at. So it's definitely a role that is pivotal in terms of what art stands for. So I was interested in your project, Antimateria, and I wanted to know if after coming out of the curatorial course you founded this, or how did that started?
It actually started a little bit before doing my master's degree. When I realized that I wanted to be a curator, the first thing that I did was looking for part-time jobs that would allow me to continue studying and continue doing, you know, the things that I thought that were the ones that would allow me to become a curator, but then also that I could, you know, still have some experience within well, professional practice. So I started writing for an arts magazine that's called Revista Código. And I was an editorial assistant, and I was basically given all of the things that were related to architecture at first, of course. So, you know, they were like, oh, help us out with writing the interview for this very famous architect, or help us out with making sense of what they mean by this, and that. So I started there, and I realized very quickly that I enjoy writing a lot. So that's definitely something that I didn't knew I would enjoy before that. But once this started, I was like, okay, this seems like a nice opportunity for me to start working hands-on with what happens with digital art in Mexico. But one of the like the current responses that I had were that there was no such thing as an art scene regarding digital arts in Mexico. And I was like,
And
what are
when
you
was that?
saying?
Can I ask?
Yeah, they were like, I mean, yeah, we're very interested in, you know, whatever contemporary practice is going on right now, but digital art, I'm not sure.
And how many years
And I
ago
was
was
like,
this?
oh my God, this was in 2015,
Okay,
so 5 years
so
ago.
5 years ago.
Yeah, not that long ago,
Yeah,
actually.
exactly. That's
And I was like, oh my God, but I can show you, you know, I have some websites and social media, you know, handles of people who
like
are in
digital
Mexico,
art.
who
It
are
is
working
actually
with
a
digital
thing.
art. And um, and my boss at the time, he was like, yes, I know, but no one has really, you know, shaped a discourse around this. So I cannot just go and print something that has no validation, which I thought was something that I've never thought about before, you know, like how do you validate these? I was like, well, I don't know, I guess I just look at it and I validate it myself because I like it and I think it's fascinating. I don't know. And that's how I started actually realizing other roles of curators and of museums and of galleries and of, you know, exhibition spaces and of studying on a famous art school and, you know, these kind of things that I was just not aware of before. So by then I was like, okay, so what would you say it needs for me to be able to write something about the art scene? And he was like, well, you know, at least you need to have like a website that talks about these people where you can see where they come from, what they're doing, where they have exhibited. And I was like, perfect, I'll do it. Um, so,
So this is
so
how
that's how
Antimateria came
Antimateria
about.
started. Yeah, and it started something like something very simple. I would even say Antimateria started as a like a directory of Mexican artists working with digital arts. You know, it was something very, very simple. It was, you know, just putting a name on it, a small text of what it's about, and some profiles of people who are working with these things. I would normally approach these artists and and ask them, like, what are your interests? How did you started working with digital tools? Why you keep on working with this? Where have you exhibited? How do you feel the whole, atmosphere in Mexico looks like for digital arts? And yeah, that's how it started. But very quickly I realized that while talking with these artists, that having this sort of directory was just not enough. They were like, it's fantastic, it's great, thank you for putting this together, but it's still something that will only reach an audience that is already interested in these practices. So
so it wasn't
it's still
reaching out
very, very small
to
group.
new audience.
Yeah. Which, for me it was like, well, this for me felt more like an excuse for me to be able to tell my boss, like, oh, there's a website actually that says this, and that. So now it's validated. Now I can write about it. So I guess the way that I started working with Antimateria was not with like a deeper, I don't know, more broader goals for what I could do with this. But then when I started actually interviewing these artists and talking with them about, their life as an artist, as a digital artist in Mexico, they were continuously telling me, well, there are not enough exhibition spaces that are interested in showing our work. And that's really sad, because a lot of them had exhibited abroad, which feels
but not in
like,
Mexico.
but not in Mexico, yeah. Which feels like a bigger step, Normally you make your own small career locally and then nationally, and then
you grow.
But it seems like it was easier for a lot of them to go abroad rather than exhibit where they live, or at least, in a city nearby or something, which I thought was just crazy. But why? Shouldn't these practices have already been like validated, then again to validation by someone else? When you exhibited abroad, shouldn't this be enough for you to be able to find a place where you can exhibit locally?
In your own
and they were like, well, no, clearly. And since I already knew that I wanted to do something regarding curatorial studies, I was like, okay, maybe that's step number 2 for Antimateria. The platform is already there. And since I was working on that on my own, I had no limitations, and I was paying for that on my own. So I was like, well, I can do whatever I want with this. And if this is something that makes sense for the artist, and if this is something that I want to also start working on, I might as well just do it. So when I started doing my master's degree, that's when I started doing exhibitions. Not before that. I didn't really feel that I had the tools for putting a show together myself. So when I started doing the master's degree, of course, I was very supported by the university as well, which I thought was really nice. And I also had a lot of, peers and lecturers that I can talk to and ask them questions about, how should I do this? How should I do that? Does this make sense? And I thought it was an interesting jump, when I tried to explain this to my parents. They were like, but what are you doing? What do you want to do? And at first I was like, oh, well, like, interior design, but like for museums. And they were like, well, that's very specific, but it sounds nice. And then later on, I was like, well, the same, but online. And they were like, what? So you're not building something? Like, we cannot go to a place to see these? Is there not going to be like a big event, like an opening with cocktails and, catering? And I was like, no, sorry.
So you were ahead of time with the
always,
social distancing.
I know. Which now it makes a lot of sense. Now my parents are like, oh, you're not closing because you're always online. And I'm like, yes.
Now everyone understands
exactly.
it.
So
this is how
I
you
don't
did
know.
your first exhibition.
Yeah, so my first exhibition, actually it was, let's say, physical exhibition that I did in January 2017. So it took me about 2 years to, from starting Antimateria to actually doing the first exhibition. I did this at Winchester School of Art, and I started what I thought was a series of exchanges So I brought the artwork of 6 Mexican artists to the UK, and then I took the work of 6 British-based artists to Mexico. So I thought that was, like an interesting part to it, because even though I've always been very interested in, let's say, working on what's going on in Mexico regarding digital arts, it's not a case where I'm not interested in what happens in other places. I'm very
Right,
interested
yeah.
in what happens in other places. And it's much more, I don't know, like a logic where I'd rather have a series of, conversations and different ways of collaborating rather than just closing myself to working only with Mexican artists. I think that's something that has also been important to think about, especially when I was in the UK and I was like, well, I need to understand how can I expand these ways of approaching these practices. And so yeah, my first exhibition was in 2017 in January. Then that year, I think probably 2017, I just went crazy and I did a lot of shows, probably around 5 or 6 that year. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Now I know how to do this. I want to do more. And then, of course, afterwards, I graduated from the master's degree and I was like, okay, so now back to the real world, where something that had always been a concern for me is being able to pay the artists that I work with. And I was like, okay, so yes, when I was doing my master's degree studies, I understand that I cannot pay, the artist for exhibiting their work. And I think that's something that they can understand as well. But once you go outside and you are now within a professional field, it's your responsibility to be able to do this. So, when I had to raise money for doing my exhibitions and not only asking for, help from different people, or in this case, the university that helped out a lot with everything that I wanted to do, that's when I started, facing other kinds of problems, especially the one that deals with, but why do you want to pay for something that is only online? Or, isn't that free? Isn't that free? Isn't that like available for everyone? Can't I just go into the artist's, I don't know, like YouTube page and watch what they do? Like, why would I give you funding for something like this?
This is actually really, really interesting and relevant to the times where I'm living right now. So yeah, it's interesting to hear that you actually had to face such challenges a few years ago, and seeing how that experience comes in practice these days. So yes, how did that go when you had to fundraise for online exhibitions? And also, I'm curious to know what the audience perception was, and still is perhaps, of going to an exhibition that is based online versus an exhibition that is within a physical space. Given that you understand the dynamic of the space and the architecture, how do you build those online places?
Well, in terms of raising funds, I think it has always been very difficult, especially within, let's say, the arts and culture field. Sometimes I found that it's easier to get funds from, let's say, technology or innovation, because one way or the other, making, let's say, I don't know, like a software company realize that, you're using their software for something that actually feels very new or very fresh, and that could bring them, other sorts of knowledge. They feel, I think, much more eager to support something like this. At least that has been my experience with this. And also my experience has been that in terms of validation, again, there's an interesting way of approaching how do you feel that an online exhibition works, while comparing that to a physical exhibition. So that's definitely something that we can, talk a little bit more about, especially like you say, now that it feels like that is changing very abruptly, and it feels like it is asking to change like very rapidly for us to be able to undergo these changes. So I think probably one of the most interesting feedback that I've had from online exhibitions, where I can say the first online exhibition that I did was for the wrong Biennale
Mm-hmm.
of 2017. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I did the embassy and the online pavilion, and it was the first online pavilion and online exhibition that I did with Antimateria. It was an open call, and I decided to, just write a very small text to talk about the digital body, and it was interesting because when I had to actually design the website, I mean, I'm not a programmer myself, but I work with, well, Antimateria is hosted on Squarespace, so
Mm-hmm.
it's a very, very easy platform to use, but it has its restrictions as well. So it was, for me, it was like, well, going in, looking for templates, changing stuff on them, kind of like getting a sense of what I wanted to show, why this, why not this other one, if I could change the fonts, if I could make these move, if I could, so I started working on this pretty much like I would work on I don't know, like on a rendering. That's what I thought, When you're rendering something, you have to choose the lights and you have to choose the colors and you have to choose what goes on top of it. If you're gonna add a tree, if you're gonna add a cat somewhere, if you're gonna add people, if you're gonna leave this plain, if it's gonna be black and white.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it was very interesting to do that, to design, because in the end, it's also a sort of, yeah, like an approach to design, at least graphic design, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. So when I did the open call, while doing the open call, I was already trying out some templates, and then afterwards, what I realized that was easier for me to do was that since I was working on the topic of the digital body, the artwork that I got, that I selected for this exhibition, I asked the artist to tell me which body part they think it could relate to more. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh my God, I hope not everyone tells me like, oh, the eyes, the head, because it's going to be like, oh, I cannot place everything on the eyes and the head. But no, it was super interesting. There was a lot of people that were like, oh, I think it has to do a lot of with movement, so probably legs, or it has a
Mm-hmm.
lot to do with typing, so probably fingers. Or I think, I don't know, it's a very tense artwork, so maybe you feel it in your stomach because, you just, I don't know, you feel tense and that's how you work. And I thought that was really nice. So in the end, what I did was like, it was a big, like an anatomy diagram, and each body part had a link to the artwork. So whether that be video or image rendering, I had also, there was this very particular one that was like, it felt like early net art, but it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
So it was something whenever you got into the website, this video played, and then after this, another one started, and, kind of designing that was also interesting to be able to, to
Mm-hmm.
give the artist what they wanted. It was also, because I was thinking about that, in terms of the space, and I was like, well, it is like when you are on the physical space and you're like, oh, should we do, like this sort of light here or not, or and it was like a well trial and error sort of thing. So I think it felt very natural.
Mm-hmm.
And afterward, like I was saying, probably let's say the general feedback was from people that was already interested in these practices and that was already following the wrong. So a lot of them were like, oh, I really like this artist. It was very interesting. I think, everything looked very, very well, like put together. But I think probably I can't remember if it was a cousin of mine, or an aunt, but I shared this online, and they were like, oh, well, I don't know what you were doing, but I clicked on this and I saw this, and I couldn't figure out what this was. So I wondered, could this be art? Is this art? Am I looking at art? This is a really bizarre website. What is this? How does it work? And I thought that was very nice because even though they were not, someone that was close to art practices, much less digital art practices. They were like, this feels weird, but this feels nicely put together, it sort of makes sense in a weird way. So it might be art. It could be art, I think. And I thought that was really nice. I mean, of course, that's also very much informed by the fact that they already know that I work within the art world. So yeah.
Uh-huh.
But I thought, it's interesting. And this person told me also that, sometimes when I'm online, especially when, you are just like going around on your Facebook feed, it feels like that's your safest space for you not to have to travel in the, like gigantic ocean that is the internet. Because it feels like everything is already selected and contained and in a way curated for you to consume. So of course that's bad in many ways, but I thought it was interesting for, people that I have, let's say, on my Facebook friends that are not particularly interested on the art world. That every now and then, whenever these sort of things pop up, they're like, okay, this is going to be something that's kind of funky, kind of weird, but why not? And I realized that it has a lot to do with the anxiety of not being able to consume all of the internet. So that's, I think, something that I've also tried to think about while thinking about online curatorial practices. It feels more and more that we want to have like a selection of things that we know we're gonna like or that we're gonna be interested on, rather than trying to just, fly solo
Navigate,
on
yeah.
the internet. It feels
So,
like you just can't do that. I don't know. It's also interesting, I guess.
so in this sort of vision that you were describing, do you think that limitations given by the web designing that we can access these days, because everyone can easily, fairly easily make a website, do you think that that space is enough to show digital art, and could that be curated in a way that is still relevant to the works? So how do you see these limitations play in favor or not to the works, to digital art? And also, you said that for some people it may be overwhelming to navigate the internet. How do you think it's best to drive interest and make people discover art in a way that is user-friendly, like you're guiding people through a museum by curating an exhibition and telling a story, what is the story of the artist, like the biography of the artist, or through a themed exhibition? How do you think this can be done online, and how do you see the restrictions of a web designing playing in favor or against the works?
Well, I think, of course, sometimes it feels like it's very limited, right?
Mm-hmm.
It feels like it's something that's pretty much always or almost always laying flat on a rectangular screen that works in a very specific way that you can interact with in limited, all through limited resources. So I think on that sense, sometimes I do feel that we need to expand the notion of what happens online and to interconnect that with other sorts of interfaces that can actually become more engaging for the audience. I think that's definitely something that I'm interested in, say, working on and talking about, which is what I've called, and a lot of people have called, hybrid spaces. So I think, when you have a little tweak to it that makes it relevant also for the physical space, I think it has, even if it's limited to, let's say, it's still restricted to a screen, still restricted to a way of approaching it, I think that if you can play around a bit with the ways in which you can go in and out of this exhibition space online, it becomes something else. And I don't know. I think, of course, sometimes I feel like we still have to explore more ways of building stuff online. But then again, when I see, the net art from the, let's say, mid-90s to 2000s, it feels like they already explored everything, It's like Olia Lialina was already working with stories in the URL. It's like, it's something that now when I started reading about this, I was like, that's crazy. Like that's really cool. But then also, I have never, I don't think that I have never thought about something like that. Like, using actually these spaces that feel only as part of a whole, or only as part of, like the navigator or the screen itself, that you don't really think much about, but that actually are things that you can play around with. I don't know. I think that's something that well, they have covered for from 10 years or 15 years ago. So I think it's more about understanding how and where these devices and spaces have expanded to, because definitely a conversation that I find, well, very important to have while talking about these spaces is also accessibility. And accessibility not necessarily on how can you find these websites, but actually accessibility in the sense of how can we make these approachable for people that might not have, let's say, internet connection at their flats or houses. And that's definitely something that might feel a little less let's say, approach from a European perspective, of course, because the accessibility that you guys have in Europe is broader than the one that we have in Latin America, of course. But I'm working from Latin America with Latin American artists. So that's definitely something that I think about a lot, and also, and I think about, we always make fun of like, oh, well, Mexican internet sucks. Like, it's super slow. I cannot just go on a website that it's made out of with, I don't know, Unity and, and expect this to work. It's just not going to happen, like even if I do have the accessibility of having internet connection. And sometimes, it's an area of design, I think, that we have to also consider. Who do we want this to be? Who do we want the audience to be, or where do we want this to reach? I don't know. Because also, I think about I think a lot about how I have a lot of students at well, I am a
Because you also
lecturer at
teach,
the
right, at the
yes,
university. Yeah.
I teach. So I teach at the university, the Autonomous University of the State of Mexico, which is a public university, which means you have to do like a really tough admission exam, but once you're in, the fees that you pay are very, very low, and you can get help from the government to actually support you while you are studying. So you have a lot of different people there, so people that, might have a very much stable income, or that come from a family that have a much stable income, but then also you have the people that fought a lot to get there, and that might not really have internet at their houses, or laptops of their own, or computers of their own. And that's definitely something that I have to find ways to work around, because well, I teach at the art faculty. I teach for the bachelor in digital arts. So imagine, I teach digital arts, and I have students that don't have computers, and they study digital art. So they are very much conditioned to work at school. So everything that they will consume at the university, on the the desktop computers from the university, with a limited time to, I don't know, to on one hand do their homework and study and do whatever they have to do, and then on the other to entertain themselves and find stuff around. So that's definitely something that I've had to think about a lot, and that with time, I think I've realized that a lot of these limitations can be worked through when you think about other ways of showing, let's say, an online exhibition outside, let's say, not outside the screen, but outside of the personal device. So, for instance, there's this experiment that we've done in the past, where these like big supermarkets like Walmart, or these places, they had like an electronics area that is really, really big, like gigantic screens everywhere. And so when we think about like doing an online exhibition or an exhibition, digital art exhibition, when you do not have the resources, you have to get like very creative and very cheeky about it.
Yeah.
So there was this one time that was like, okay, so let's think about places that already have these devices, that already have what we need. And one of the places that was chosen was a Walmart. You know, like, oh, Walmart has, you know, this particular one
Definitely
has a
have a great
gigantic wall.
department. Yeah.
Have you know, there's a lot of people that come through. You know, so maybe we do some sort of activation on a weekend where everyone is doing their shopping. You know, it might be interesting. So that's the sort of things that I found that are not necessarily, let's say, working with different tools or developing different tools. It's much more about thinking, where do we already have this accessibility and how can we make this available for others? So this one time, one of my students had a friend that worked there at Walmart at this particular area, the electronics department. And he was like, okay, how do you choose the contents of your screens? And he was like, well, I don't know. I just turn them on and, you know, they show whatever. It's like, okay, so that means that if I give you something, no one's gonna, you know, you're not gonna get into trouble with anyone because you are showing something weird. And he was like, well, no one cares, you know, as long as this is on, it should be fine. So we're like, okay, let's do a video selection.
So you went on and took over the Walmart.
Yeah, so the exhibition was there, you know, and I thought it was really funny because, you know, there was people that was just not caring, you know, it was like, oh, well, Walmart, whatever, the electronics section. But there was people that were just doing their grocery shopping, going like, what is this?
This
you
is
know,
unusual.
And actually a couple of them asked the guy that was in charge, like, oh, is this like, I don't know, part of show? You know, like a, I don't know, like a TV series that I've never heard of. If this is like a, I don't know, like a funky thing that goes on in like Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network, or, and he was like, oh, well, no, some art students, they are showing their work here, and you know, yeah. And I thought that was very interesting because even though it was not necessarily online, it was, let's say, a digital approach for making available something that might never reach these people, you know, that are doing their grocery shopping there, and that they can choose whether or not they want to keep on seeing that or whether or not they want to pay attention to it. But that's pretty much what you do anywhere.
Yeah, in life.
You know?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So,
we have a question coming through, and it's actually really relevant from Eleonora. She's saying that a lot of artists from Venezuela and Mexico have been able to support their families selling crypto art, and in some specific cases, creating and selling rare papers. And then she follows on asking, what do you think the role of cryptocurrencies for these kind of communities play? And crypto art and cryptocurrencies, of course, yeah.
Crypto art and cryptocurrencies, okay.
Because I also know that Dada, the platform, there's a lot of artists drawing on the platform and trading as well. Crypto art.
I think I haven't really come across a lot of Mexican artists, at least the ones that I work with, that have actively turned into crypto art or cryptocurrencies to share and or make a living. But I do know that there are a lot of artists that live abroad, that live, you know, outside of their home countries, that's the best way for them to send money to their families, which I think it's very interesting because it's sort of hacking, you know, the economic structures of their own country, which I think is fantastic. And something that I think about as well is in 2017, there was this very big, awful earthquake in Mexico City, and it destroyed a lot of houses and a lot of places, and it was a very hard moment for Mexico City and the people who live there. And there was this one artist, Arcángel Constantini, who is really, really interesting pioneer of net art in Mexico and a great thinker as well, and also a really good friend of mine, who started a platform, a cryptocurrency platform, where you could mine money that would get eventually donated for the families that that were,
What in need
well,
of help.
yeah. So what they asked for the community to do was just like, okay, you only have to go through these steps, very, very easy steps. Just go on, install this on your computer. And they had like a transparency chart where they were showing how much it was being mined and where it was going as well. So, and they were like, okay, just keep this running. If you have, a computer on your house, if you have some desktop computers at your workplace and you are not actually physically there, it's not important. You can just leave this and keep it running while you are outside helping out. You don't have to decide whether you'd like to, help someone online or offline. You can do both. And I thought that was a very interesting switch to have, because I don't know if you saw the news about this earthquake, but earthquakes are something that are very common in Mexico City, and every 30 years or so we have a very, like one that just destroys everything. And people are very close in terms of a community, and so there's actually people out there, like, with stuff running around, feeding people and giving people things. And I don't know, that's just the way it works. But then again, for the people that might not be able to do that physically, they also had a chance to help without necessarily, we are not the richest country, of course, so you cannot just go on and say, yes, I'm gonna donate, 1,000 pounds for this, because I don't have 1,000 pounds for me to donate. But if I can mind this, and I understand the logic of this is something that might not at all, have an impact, bad impact, let's say, on my economy, but then I can still help. So definitely in that sense, cryptocurrencies have worked in a very interesting way, in this case, from let's say, an initiative that was within the arts community, which I also thought was very interesting.
We have a couple
yeah.
of comments that I just wanted to read out. So there's Domenico saying, suggesting that perhaps students should create art from the university's computers and trade it and make money to buy a computer for their homes and carry on the work and creating art. So that could be a way. And then Eleonora, she's saying that she was having these thoughts about the economy of crypto and crypto art, about the fact that US kept the power in Venezuela some time ago, and so because people there couldn't have access to the internet anymore, these sort of brought back what we were talking earlier on about connection problems, and how we can solve this. In a way, I do understand that, mining crypto, it makes sense because you are, in a way, not attached to the economy of a country, and you can keep doing it and then, supporting others and the community, although it does have some environmental implications. So I think it is quite questionable in a way. And I think it will be probably a matter of time until the government will be able to put their hands on the crypto market as well and try and control it. So all the decentralization, it may as well become centralized again, or maybe not. And I think it's actually what we're living right now is a very interesting time, because I think none of us know or has a clue about what life is going to be after the coronavirus, and what systems and economies will be like, not just about art, but about the whole system, the whole capitalism that we've been, living in for the last years, and how this is going to be changed by what we're living these days. I think, I'll be interested to know what the people watching think about this as well, and what you think the economy around, especially museums, will be like, and how culture could still be relevant and free, in a way, accessible. So thinking about accessibility, how do you think museums are currently adapting to the current state of things? And how do you, if you can envision a future post-COVID crisis, how do you think this will be like? And
I
for
think,
everyone
well,
watching, if you
first of
have
all,
thoughts or questions,
a
please do
question.
share them.
Yeah. I think, well, on my experience for the past couple of weeks, I think it's been very interesting the way in which a lot of museums that had a very hard time validating online practices or practices that happen within a screen are now being, in a way, forced to push themselves into saying, well, if you go on and say that this is actually not as important or not as compelling as something that happens outside of the screen, you are also closing the doors for you to have an alternative way of approaching your institution while this pandemic is there. So I think on one hand, they have been, yes, forced to validate online spaces. So that's, for me, I think, a really, really big change. And also for art fairs, you know. And I was also talking with a friend recently about how naive a lot of the decisions towards how they should go online feel for the people that have been working with online spaces for quite a while. So I think, you know, it's like, why would you ever do like a 4-hour tour with a curator, like in a badly recorded video? Like, oh, you don't do that. We've been through this. We've learned from this, you know.
Yeah.
So I think, well, it's interesting because now also all of these practitioners and academics and curators and artists that have been working with this are the ones that, in a way, are helping turn this around a bit, helping turn, you know, the where does this stand in, I don't know, like a crisis like this, and how can these structures and platforms help mitigate at least a bit what's going on outside of our houses and on the streets, basically. So on one hand, yes, I think that's something that has to change. And if I can talk from my own experience, as I was saying, I work for the Center of Digital Culture in Mexico City. And well, this center is basically part of the Secretary of Culture, which means that we are a government-funded institution. So it's interesting to think about this because we are probably one of the only institutions that deal with digital culture in Mexico as a whole that are being supported by the government. But this also means other sort of things. So on one hand, we are not a museum. We are a center for digital culture. Sometimes, you know, these areas of the government that choose how much budget you get each year, sometimes it's hard for us to communicate that we need, you know, like a very well-structured programming team or web design team, you know, and they're like, but why would you, like, we can just give you whatever we give other museums, that's fine. You'll be fine. They can work with this. And it's like, well, actually, no, we need a little bit more because of this, and that, you know. So these things are normally very, very hard to communicate. To have a really well-structured programming team, to having a really well-structured communication team, social media team. So these are the things that happen within this center, but that have been very hard to communicate to other areas of the Secretary of Culture. And that now, for the past couple of weeks, that everyone has been panicking over what are we going to do with this, because you have a very shitty website and you cannot go online. You are not the Louvre, you know. What are we going to do? So they are like, oh, but, you know, remember the Digital Culture Center? They have a really, really big programming team. So we've been like...
So you've been advising other museums?
Over and over, they're like, you know what to do, please help us out. Like, you have all of the knowledge and experience. And it's like, well, you know, see,
The
this is why you need to pay for this. And not only for us, for everyone, because we cannot go and do the job of, I don't know, like 50 plus museums that need this kind of job now. We cannot do that.
Yeah.
We are 30 people. It's a really small space.
Yeah, you cannot
But I
scale
think
it.
for
Yeah.
us, this is definitely yeah, like a very radical change in the way we are being perceived by the Secretary of Culture. So they are now like, oh, but what are you gonna do? And we're like, you know, full on, let's go online. What can we go and do online? This. Okay, how can this work? A 360 video. You can do, I don't know, a live stream for this one. And then for this one, we can do an open call on social media. We've also been the first cultural center to have a TikTok account, which everyone was just like laughing out loud, you know, like, why would you want that? And now everyone is like, how can I use TikTok? Like, I'll go
Watching
figure out.
tutorials.
And I think it's, you know, I think it's interesting. Of course, this means that we've had a very tough couple of weeks assessing and, you know, having conversations about what can these other places do. And one of the most, I think, the deepest conversations that we've had has to deal with, you cannot just go on and do a slideshow of images of exhibition views and call it an online exhibition. That's not an online exhibition. And they're like, but why not? It's online, it's on pictures. It's like, yes, but this is not thought as an online exhibition. Nothing wrong with that. But you need to understand what the differences are. How can you do this? How can you work on this other thing? And just, you know, build a case of what are you able to do and how to develop that. And I think that's one of the hardest things, because of course no one really teaches you that. You have to, you know, go on, do your thing, mess it up a couple of times, and little by little start understanding how to do stuff. And I think that has been one of the toughest things, you know. And also, you know, we see like these sort of mistakes, like rookie mistakes, like, oh yeah, let's just, you know, build a website where you can just scroll around all of the exhibition and we have like HD 300 DPI images. It's like, no, you don't do that. That's never ever gonna, you know, download with the Mexican internet. You can't do that. Don't go above 150 DPIs. Don't go above 720, you know, pixels. And it's something that feels, you know, for people that work within this field, like so simple. It's obvious, you know. But then you go back and realize how deeply behind this knowledge they are, because they've never been full on aware of the importance of, or the I don't know, like the ways of distributing their approach to art online. I think, yeah. And another conversation that we have is, if it's not made to be seen through a screen, this can never really become the full experience. That's another thing. We have a really big advantage there, because everything that we work with is meant to be seen through a screen. I wouldn't necessarily would say online, but it is meant to be seen through a screen. It's meant to be interacted with through a keyboard or through a mouse pad or through a, it's something that has already been envisioned this way. So placing that online is just allowing people to interact with something that was already meant to be seen like this. But when you have something that was not meant to be seen and experienced like this, let's say a sculpture that you have to walk around, approach it, then you have to figure out ways to do that and understand what's what you would do to approach this if you were in the physical space. So no, then again, if you have a series of slideshows of exhibition views of an sculptural exhibition, that's not gonna do it. I mean, I'm very much aware that walking around the sculpture digital might as well not do it either, but it has a little bit more, I don't know, like coherence to what you're looking at. So I would say that that's something that needs to be understood now, that it's definitely changing now, and that might definitely help the way in which other institutions that have never been interested in these practices might now, make sense of what's going on there, and not necessarily just go on and say like, oh yeah, an Instagram performance, like what is that? It
Yeah,
has its
absolutely.
value.
I
So
totally
yeah.
agree with you. And I think what you said is very profound, because I've seen far too many museums rushing to bring their collection to the internet without. Thank you for
Should
bearing
we
with
go
us. Hey, yeah, I don't know what happened. I think as soon as you get over an hour, it somehow stops. I don't know why.
Ah, okay.
But yeah, sorry everyone. Yeah, what I wanted to say just to conclude is that I've seen far too many museums putting their collection online without really thinking it through, what it means to take a collection online and what's the best way of showing work. But I suppose that everyone's been working in a rush and in a bit of a panic mode, because a lot of museums have shut with very little notice. And so everyone worked so hard to still make the content of the museums available online. So I think we should also forgive the mistakes we see, because people will need time to learn. And I think, the fact that a lot of museums and institutions have been neglecting the fact that the internet exists. And so they should also have their own presence there. And how do you build this presence? It's something that there's never been a budget for it. Or if there was a budget, was very small. And so people had to reinvent their presence on the internet, especially for institutions that have been running for hundreds of years, and they have become a place that people go travel to and visit in person. And so the whole economy was based around how do we make people travel to one location? But then this process here, which is non-sustainable anymore, because making people traveling every week and taking planes, across the ocean, is not a healthy way of living on this planet. So I think what's happening right now forces us to think of new ways of enjoying art, making it accessible to everyone, and also closing these huge gaps of missing knowledge, because technology and technological culture, in a way, is not something that you study at school. I mean, at least I'm in my 30s, and I did not study anything as such when I was at school. So I think it's a very important time to reflect on our presence online and how we see this going forward, in the future. But it's been so interesting talking to you about these topics and having your views about doing exhibitions online, the role of the curator, and how this has been, for you for the past few years, since 2017 till now. And yes, thank you for everyone watching and sharing your comments. It's been wonderful to have your feedback, and thank you for the support, because I think a lot of people that shared their thoughts with us today were saying that, for example, digital literacy is a must. That's what Domenico is underlining now, for everyone, including museums and art galleries, which I totally agree with.
Yeah, totally, 100%. And yeah, I think that's the only way we are gonna be able to actually, I don't know if empower is the word, but probably, to think about building our own structures and platforms from there, right? I think that should be the next step, to not depend on companies that we can't control, especially when it comes down to their personal politics and things that we might not necessarily be I don't know, like wanting to expand or perpetuate, I guess. So
Yeah, for sure.
so yeah, definitely, I think that's something that should happen next. Fingers
Yeah.
crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed, but it's an interesting time, and I hope everyone watching enjoyed this talk and found it inspiring as much as I did. Thank you, Doreen. It's been
Thank
wonderful
you for
talking to
having
you,
me.
and thank you everyone who joined us.
Yes.
See you
Thank
soon.
you.
Take care. Stay
Thank
safe,
you.
everyone.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.